No video?
No video at the moment.
Hmm.
Oh, there we are.
Oh.
All right, we're live. I
All
guess
right.
it took a little while there. Yeah, and if anyone who was joining us last month thought last month that my technology woes was awkward, that took about 5 minutes to go through. So anyone who's with us on YouTube, thank you very much for joining us here tonight. My name is Tristan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with Pflag Canada, York Region. And welcome to tonight's Coffee Night Let's Chat session, part 2 of our series on harm reduction. We do want to acknowledge the land in which we are streaming from you from tonight. It's the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat nations. We are very grateful that they have been able to care for this land over many centuries, and it's important for us to care for one another in that same way. And it's important to also acknowledge our closest nation as well here in York Region, the Chippewas of Georgina Island. And so thank you all again for joining us here tonight. Again, our part 2 of our harm reduction series. And we're very excited to have these discussions. It's something that we haven't really discussed before with Pflag, but harm reduction, substance use, drug use are queer issues, and they do impact the queer community. And we want all of you out there to be aware of the facts of everything that you need to know about it, and for any friends, family, and allies of any queer individuals to know how to best support them. Joining us tonight, we have Alex from CAYR Community Connections to continue on our discussion. And last month, what we discussed was really kind of a harm reduction 101 in terms of what is harm reduction, why it's important, how to really build your own harm reduction toolkit so you can use drugs safely, use substances safely, and how our allies in the community can best support individuals who may be using substances in their lives and what to look out for. And we're going to provide a lot more background to a lot of that information. We're going to talk about things that are happening within the country, things that are happening locally as well, just to around drug supplies and items like that. And Alex is going to take us through that. Did you have anything to add about last month, Alex, that I might be missing?
No, that was good. That was good.
Awesome. Alrighty. And have I given you the co-hosting privileges there so you can share your screen?
Yeah, I think so. There we go.
Alrighty, perfect. So Alex, feel free to take it away.
Okay. So like Tristan mentioned before, we talked a lot about harm reduction, why is harm reduction important, a lot of different harm reduction supplies, and all sorts of things. So today we're kind of going to get into a little more nitty gritty of harm reduction. So we'll start off by talking about Protractors and Declemented stages of change model. So this is something I kind of learned way back in school, where we talk about a lot of different stages of change, and not just substance use, drug use, but even behaviors as well. So let me throw out a kind of question to everybody. If I were to tell you that tonight you can't use Netflix, you can't use your drugs of choice, you can't smoke, you can't play video games, you can't do the things that you enjoy, you can't drink wine, anything of that, how do you feel right now? I know I feel a little sweaty because I'm a pretty avid coffee drinker. So if I don't get my coffee, it's not going to be a good day for me. And so a lot of times we kind of hear that people are told one thing or another isn't so great, isn't something that they should do, but it's something that they do because maybe they enjoy it. Maybe they do it because of other reasons, And so kind of when we kind of go through these stages of change, we'll kind of see the different things that people might come across while they're thinking of maybe changing a behavior, maybe changing their substance use, whether it be impacting them positively, negatively, or all sorts. So we'll kind of start at pre-contemplation. So pre-contemplation, and I'll kind of use myself as an example as a pretty strong coffee drinker. So years before, when I was in university, I was a really heavy coffee drinker. I would say maybe like 6-7 cups a day, which is a lot. But at the time, it's kind of what I needed to do to kind of get through the day with like stress of school and all that. And so at the time, I was drinking a lot of coffee. I was feeling pretty good. Some days not so good because the coffee was a lot, but kind of getting through the day. And kind of as I moved through a couple of months, when I had a doctor checkup, doctor kind of recommended that my coffee was a little too much. So I was thinking, maybe he's right, but I still want to drink coffee. It kind of gets me through the day. I really like it, but maybe sometimes I'm not feeling so great. My stomach's getting a little upset. Sometimes I spend a little too much money on the coffee as well. So I was thinking, okay, maybe I'll kind of lessen it. So I'm kind of looking at maybe decreasing like 1 cup a day or 1 cup a week, seeing how that feels. So great. Maybe my stomach's getting thinking of sometimes. Oh, you myself.
No,
So
sorry.
no worries. But just kind of thinking, decreasing it maybe a week or so, see how I feel, see how that change is going for me. And so kind of moving from contemplation of thinking of different changes to my coffee drinking, and moving towards preparation where I'm kind of thinking, okay, I kind of want to implement some kind of things to kind of decrease my coffee drinking because I feel it's a little too much. And, I'm kind of taking my doctor's word that, okay, it's a little too much, maybe not so great for me. And, maybe see how I feel about that. So I kind of introducing these different kind of alternatives to my coffee drinking, but I still want to drink the coffee because that's what gets me through the day. And so I'm kind of moving into the action phase where I've decreased a couple of cups of coffee. So maybe I'm down to like maybe 5 cups a day, maybe 4, sometimes depending on how I'm feeling. Kind of using tea as like a bit alternative because I like to drink throughout the day a lot. So kind of introducing tea, kind of liking it, seeing what kind of teas I like instead of always drinking coffee. Making sure I drink water because sometimes I forget to drink water and it's not the greatest. And so I'm kind of introducing a lot of these different alternatives. And so as I move from action to maintenance, making sure that a lot of these things are working for me. The tea's working for me. I found Earl Grey to be really great for me. I love it. And getting my coffee down to however I like. It's about 4 cups a day. Works for me. I'm pretty good with it. Pretty happy. And then maybe one day it's a heavy day. I remember there was actually one day where I had finals. It was really hectic, really heavy, and I was really stressed. Like I could not. I needed the coffee to stay awake to kind of get me through to studying those finals. Like it was a lot. I think it was about like five finals in like I think in like 2 weeks. So it was a lot, really stressful. And so tea wasn't really working for me. I really needed to kind of grind through the studying. And so I would kind of move into relapse where I did go back to drinking 7 cups a day because I had to kind of get through the grind and to be able to stay awake. It just kind of like was like my go-to of just kind of drinking coffee, going back to 7 cups. At that time, it worked for me. And so after the finals, and when I did kind of relapse to going back to heavier drinking of coffee, I was kind of thinking, I'm not so stressed now. Finals are over. I kind of like drinking tea. I don't really want to drink 7 cups a day anymore. So let me kind of go back to what was working for me before of drinking Earl Grey, drinking less coffee, drinking more water, getting a little exercise as well on the side. And so I kind of shift back to maintenance. And so a lot of people will kind of go through the cycle of stages of change. And, whenever someone kind of comes to us to talk about harm reduction, we'll meet anybody on any part of the stages of change model, wherever they are. And we'll kind of be able to kind of help talk about, what kind of things are kind of going on, is what ERA likes to kind of say is instead of focusing on what's not working, we focus on what is working, what's working about, your behavior, your drug of choice, what's working in that. And if there's anything that isn't working, how can we kind of tune that so that it's kind of working for you a little bit better, And so kind of as we go through stages of change, and we all kind of go through this cycle of change in a lot of different areas in our lives. For me, it's coffee. For me, sometimes it's video games. Also exercise. I kind of shifting back and forth with like exercise. Sometimes I'm really good. Sometimes I'm pretty bad. And so we kind of all go through these stages of change. So it doesn't just incorporate, you know, substance use, drug use, but also behaviors, things that we kind of apply to in our lives to kind of change or tune a behavior that we're kind of going through throughout the life. Any kind of questions or anything like that?
I love that thought, and I love this the stages of change model, because it really refers back to what we were discussing last month about meeting people where they're at, and that's not just in terms of a physical location or anything like that. This is about where they're at in their journey of substance use, and not leaving them there. So partnering in with them through the change model to ensure that they are making the best decisions for themselves, that they are well informed of the next steps and decisions and what could happen, and going from there. So I love this part, and I love the example about coffee, because as you're going through it, I'm like, yeah, I've got this journey with coffee myself, where I am if I've got like if I could not get sleep the night before, which was pretty much last night, I'm having a lot of coffee, and I know what is going to happen with me, because I don't drink a lot of coffee myself. Halfway through the day, I'm maybe only a cup and a half in, which is a lot for me, and I'm starting to get anxious, and I'm starting to get jittery, and I know kind of where I'm at that point. And I know what is likely to happen, but I kind of needed it in the moment and made that decision. And I love that example, because it really perfectly illustrates what harm reduction is all about. And it's meeting people where they're at, not leaving them there, and partnering with them through that model until they're ready to independently go at it on their own. So this is phenomenal. Thank you.
Exactly. Well said. And even if it's just, moving through the continuum or going back into different kind of stages of change, we're there for people on their journey of where they want to go. And we'll address anything that, might come up that they want to change, or someone might feel that, maybe I kind of want to stick with this behavior. We're there for them, and making sure that to minimize any harms or anything that might kind of come up through that journey of stages of change, and just being able to be there for them.
Yeah, and even the term relapse, we often, when you associate it with the term relapse with drug use, it's often in a negative connotation. But if in anyone's throughout anyone's life, I would dare to challenge anyone, if they haven't relapsed on something in their personal life, whether it be use the example of going to the gym and that physical care. How many times have I relapsed on working out? I could. If I had a nickel every time, I'd be a millionaire at this point, right? So it's really and when you start to apply that train of thought into the everyday things in your life, it really just becomes natural to begin to think about other items in our lives, like substance use, in that manner.
Exactly. Thanks, Tristan.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're kind of gonna get into a little data heavy about the Toronto's drug checking service. So kind of bear with me as we kind of go through the kind of nitty gritty of the data of this, but I'll make it as easy as possible to kind of understand. And so the Toronto drug checking service is a somewhat new service, started in 2019. It's kind of run by St. Mike's Hospital, along with other hospitals, and KMH as well. So they're all kind of in this together for the drug checking service. And so how it works is that someone can kind of bring in their drugs or their used paraphernalia. So it could be a pipe, cooker, syringe that they've used, and they'll submit this to the drug checking service. Within about 24 hours, they'll kind of get back to the person on the results of what's in the drug, what's exactly is in the drug. So we'll detail everything that will be in the drug. And you'll be surprised to find that a lot of what people are getting aren't exactly what they are expecting. Sometimes we'll have information where people will get, like 2 different depressants within the drug, or they'll find caffeine in the drug. A lot of things that you don't expect to find in a drug, but it's there. The results will show that they are in the drugs. And so this drug checking service has been pretty good. They're trying to get to same day service, and they're working pretty diligently. If you ever kind of go on Google, just type in Toronto Drug Checking Service. If you sign up on their email, they'll kind of email you every 2 weeks of kind of reports of different things that they've found in the drug checking service. It's really good data. Aaron and I really, really love it. It really helps kind of show how dangerous things can be, because we don't expect drugs to be, paired with other kind of different drugs that we don't expect at all. And so the new term that we like to use is, instead of overdosing, it's poisoning. And poisoning in the fact that a lot of people, it's not that people are using more drugs, or people are, using much more drugs than before, but it's the fact that what people are getting in the drugs aren't exactly what they're getting. In the fact that people are getting fentanyl, and they're finding that there's benzodiazepines, that there's edazolam, which is similar to benzodiazepine. And the fact that you can find that and fentanyl together, you'll kind of have like a double whammy effect of a depressant. And sometimes you'll even have alcohol as well, and that would be like a triple effect of depressant. And so kind of as we kind of go through the data of last year's drug checking report, we'll kind of see what that's like. So kind of bear with me, very data heavy, but we'll kind of get through it. So this is from January 1st to December 31st of last year, 2020. And so these were kind of the results that they found. So within 1,657 samples that they checked, 59% of them were substances itself, and 41% were used paraphernalia. 53% of their samples were expected to be fentanyl. And of those fentanyl samples, they had various shades of purple, pink, red, blue, green, yellow, and white. A lot of different variety. And 7% of those expected samples have been known to be associated with an overdose. And so 98% of those samples contain fentanyl, and 77% of those samples contain both fentanyl and a benzodiazepine-related drug. And so because of those 77%, you'll kind of have a double whammy effect of depressant on the breathing. And so when a lot of EMS or people with naloxone, they're administering naloxone, and sometimes the person will not wake up. Person will not have a reaction. And that's because they are addressing the fentanyl with the naloxone kit, but the benzodiazepine is still depressing the person. And so we found that oxygen has been known to kind of help alleviate some of those effects that the benzodiazepine is causing. And so it's important to know that within not just fentanyl or in benzodiazepines, but in any other drugs outside of weed or mushrooms, psilocybin, you will most likely have fentanyl, benzodiazepines, edazolam, and all sorts of other drugs within other drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, and all the different sorts. Even in MDMA and a lot of party drugs as well. And so we'll kind of see more of the data later, but just kind of keep that note at the back of your mind as well as we kind of go through this.
I think, sorry to interrupt, Alex, but I think maybe if we can define what, like we're talking about benzodiazepines or benzos, fentanyl, and what exactly are the effects of these items? Like what are they, and what are the effects on their body? Like they're depressants. They kind of, my knowledge is that they kind of, they lower your blood pressure. They lower kind of your body's responsiveness, your breathing, the normal kind of auto functions of your body. Like what are these specific drugs, and is that kind of an accurate description of them?
Yeah, definitely very accurate. And so with benzodiazepines, you'll kind of get those as different ways to alleviate pain, alleviate anxiety. A lot of different ways that doctors may prescribe benzodiazepines or edazolam as well. So edazolam is similar in benzodiazepine, where it also kind of suppresses breathing, lowers the blood pressure as well. but it's like about 10 times more stronger than benzodiazepines. And so if you kind of have adazolam within, drugs like fentanyl that people are getting, it'll cause a really strong reaction with the fentanyl as well, or with any other drug, if like say in cocaine or methamphetamine as well. And so it's kind of important to kind of understand that a lot of these drugs are kind of tainted and crossed over with other drugs, and they have a lot of different adverse effects that you might not realize or come to know, because what you expect to buy as fentanyl or MDMA, you expect to have those kind of effects, but you don't always kind of have the intended effects, because you have other things within those drugs as well, such as benzodiazepine, adazolam. You even have cocaine mixed in with methamphetamine as well. So a lot of different sorts of effects that people might not realize will be happening. That's in their drugs.
Yeah, like it almost sounds like, not to make too much light of it, but it's like trying to like order something off a menu at a restaurant, and you're at like a burger, for example, and you ask, okay, I don't want any onions, I don't want any pickles, things like that, and it still comes your way, and you don't know it until until you've bitten in. You're like, okay, this is not what I ordered, except you could have very disastrous impacts from it.
Yeah, exactly. And so as we kind of go through the data, we'll show a little bit more later. So it's always kind of important, like Mara and I always kind of, if people are going to use, different types of drugs, just be aware that things can be tainted with other drugs that you might not know. And so it's just kind of being aware of that, making sure you have naloxone for any type of drug that you're using outside of maybe weed and mushrooms. Making sure you have naloxone kits for those as well, oxygen as well if possible, and just kind of being aware of this of what's happening.
And we've talked about naloxone a little bit last month, but do you mind sharing, what exactly does it do to the body? How does it interact with those drugs and counteract those impacts? And where can people get these kits?
Mm-hmm. So naloxone, or Narcan, so it is a drug reversal kit only for opioids. So opioids would be things like heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, or even prescription opioids as well. And so they block the opioid receptors in the brain with the naloxone or the Narcan. And so the effects of opioids will be lessened by a lot. The opioids will not be able to kind of bind to the opioid receptors in the brain. And so people will be alleviated of any negative effects of opioids. And so where you can get them at your local pharmacy. Be aware that a lot of times the pharmacist will kind of ask for a health card, but that's not needed at all. If they're free, you can get them at any local pharmacy, or you can get them at any harm reduction service. I think we have I think at the end of our PowerPoint, we can kind of give up. If you ever kind of Google Be Drug Smart, we found that they've been pretty good at kind of doing a little tiny intake of YD naloxone. They'll ship it to you for free, and also we can also kind of deliver it or ship it to whoever may need it.
Yeah, definitely. I think is important to have it, especially 53% of the samples checked in 2020 had fentanyl in them. That's just that's mind-boggling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So kind of just keeping going through with this, xylazine, which has been known to be a tranquilizer for veterinarians. It's been seen in 7% of fentanyl samples from September to October to December. Even carfentanil has been seen in 2% of the expected fentanyl substances from July to December. And so a lot of these times, a lot of the way that drugs kind of come into Canada or to even the United States is that there are drug cartels that are manufacturing these illicit drugs. And so how it comes that a lot of these samples, whether it be fentanyl, benzodiazepines, methamphetamine, cocaine, and whatnot. So kind of going through this notion that the cartels, so let's say from Monday, the cartels decide to manufacture some fentanyl. And so they'll kind of go through using their different pill presses, scales and whatnot, all their different manufacturing equipment. They'll be using it to manufacture the fentanyl on the Monday. And so on the Tuesday, they decide, okay, we're gonna kind of make make cocaine. And so they'll use the same different manufacturing equipment, using the same things, and you'll see that the fentanyl has kind of crossed over to the cocaine. And so on Wednesday, they decide to make another different kind of drug and also still use the same equipment. And so a lot of that has been crossed over, and this is why you kind of see a lot of samples kind of come up with a lot of unexpected things like fentanyl, cocaine, and what have you. And so from an economic perspective, it wouldn't make sense for these cartels to kind of kill off their customers, right? From an economic standpoint, it wouldn't make sense to kill your customers, right? But it's the fact that a lot of these manufacturing equipment aren't being cleaned, aren't being really regulated, and so you have a lot of these cross contaminations of different kind of drugs or other kind of things as well. And even with the drug report itself, it doesn't even account for the different fillers that the cartels may be using to kind of manufacturing the drugs as well. And so kind of keeping that in the back of your head is kind of like what's going on within the drug supply of Canada. So 63% of the fentanyl substances contained benzodiazepines related drug, compared to 39%, which happened in January to March. 31% of the expected heroin substances had contained fentanyl. Presence of the two most common cocaine adulterants, I can't pronounce those two, but you can read it. They increased by more than 100% between January to December in expected cocaine substances. And substances expected to be opioids continue to be significantly more contaminated than other expected drugs, which means that there were a lot more other drugs found in each opioid substances. And so 5% of fentanyl substances only contain fentanyl, and none of the heroin substances tested contain only heroin. And so with that data, it's scary, because if someone is looking to purchase cocaine or heroin, they're not only going to find heroin, which is what they expected to buy, and there's other things within the heroin that at the look of your eye you can't tell. But with this data checking, we can know that this is what's going on with the drug supply.
It's really interesting, especially kind of the economic model that you laid out for us, because it makes me think about this event that was done by one of our local police services a couple months ago. They did kind of a little bit of a live Q&A on Facebook with their drug crime unit, and one of the questions that was posed in there was, why does fentanyl exist? Why is it out there in the world at this point? And one of the answers that was provided, which kind of really struck me the wrong way, was because that there is a demand for it. And it's not necessarily that there's a demand for it, it's that because there's a lack of regulation of a safe drug supply, it's getting into the supply of other substances. People are, they want to purchase, or they know how to safely use these items for their bodies, and they're getting something that they didn't pay for. Pretty much. And though a lot of these items are still considered illegal, there's definitely a shift at this point where and I'm sure we'll get into that a little later, where the chiefs of police have even recognized in Canada that this is a public health issue and not a criminal issue. And so at some point we have to address the public health issue through an economic model, which we've started with marijuana at some point, but and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that with this video coming up. I'm sure I was just kind of reading between the lines of what I saw in the image there when we were reviewing things earlier. But it's just a different way of thinking that I think a lot of people need to get on board with, because it's just not about it's not about that this is illegal and this is it, and people who use them are criminals. It's that a lot of folks know how to use these substances safely for themselves, and they're being taken advantage of.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to push for a safe supply. I think ERA has been trying to contact public health and trying to get doctors who can prescribe different drugs and substances, and so that they won't be kind of tainted with like different types of other drugs or other kind of fillers and whatnot. And like a lot of harm reductionists, you'll kind of hear advocating for a safe supply. It's not fair that we kind of place this hierarchy of which drug is better than the other, or what drug is more safer than the other. We put alcohol as a substance that we can use every day, we can purchase anytime, and it's been found to be the number one causes of death, and compared to all the other drugs combined. We even had up in Toronto, we had our lovely Ford government. They advocated for bucket beer and putting beer parks in parks where kids play. And so it's not fair that we place this unfair hierarchy of alcohol being something we can use compared to illicit drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and whatnot. It's we need to be safe for everybody. People can use different substances safely, and they choose to use these substances because that's what they want to do, and so we want to make sure that people are safe, minimize harm, and advocating for a safe supply will really help go a long way in that.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating point too, just about alcohol alone, how, just the deregulation is something that we have been so used to culturally for a long period of time, it hasn't really helped at all. The more that we've deregulated it, the more harm it's really done. How many news stories do we have to see about a drunk driver who just, thought that they were okay, but they weren't, or an impaired driver using marijuana and things like that. So there needs to be certainly, an individual kind of element of self-control, but at the same time, deregulating something isn't always the answer to trusting the individual at times, I'd say.
Yeah, well put. Any kind of questions on this? I know it was a little heavy to kind of go through the data and kind of read through a lot of different things.
I don't see any questions here in our live stream, but I want to double check questions that we had come in, just to make sure that we're covering off things here. So I know we covered this a little bit, but I think kind of just in terms of reviewing it and busting the stigma around it, we've talked in the news a lot. There's been a lot of news in the last year around the opioid crisis and opioid overdoses and things like that. Why should we continue to see this as a poison? Or I guess we've already covered it. I don't mean to continue repeating things, but to emphasize that it's important to see this as a poisoning epidemic than an issue of overdosing, because these individuals just don't know what's in these supplies, and that just, again, I think speaks to the drug supply. I just wanted to make sure we addressed that, because we had that question come in.
Yeah, well put. Like we advocating that it's a poisoning rather than people using more drugs or what have you, but it's that people don't know what's in the supply. There was even, I think I think last year or 2 years ago that when I was reading a report that there's even a pharmacy company that produced 6-MAM, which had been an opioid that put in the market, but had been found to have caused renal failure, and so they kind of had to take that off the market. For whatever reason, they decided not to destroy the drugs, but they housed it in a warehouse of theirs, and it got broken into. by a lot of these cartels. They took it, introduced it into their supply, and for a while, some people were having renal failure with the drugs that they're using.
Wow.
And so it's important that these supplies or these drugs are, there's a lot of so many different things that are in the drugs that people don't know, and you can't tell at a glance. That's why having these drug checking services has been really important, have been really good. And unfortunately, we don't have one in York region, which sucks. But hopefully we can kind of get some funding, kind of get this going up in York region, and like honestly all over, because these services have been really good in identifying what's in the supply and kind of letting people know to keep that in mind, and to make sure that you can use substances without a fear of things that might be happening, a poisoning that may happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and do we have time for a video, Tristan?
Yeah, we got time.
Yeah, okay. And so this is a video kind of addressing the drug history. So this is US based, but a lot of the statistics and things that they're talk about within the video happens a lot in Canada as well. And so it's going to talk a little bit about the drug history of the United States, how a lot of the systems and policies have been linked to a lot of anti-Black racism, anti-oppression, decolonizing. A lot of these issues will kind of come up as we kind of go through the video and watch it. It will talk about a lot of heavy themes of anti-Black racism, especially with George Floyd and the murder and whatnot. And so if anyone that is watching the video is kind of had enough of hearing these kind of talks, these kind of themes, and just kind of want to not engage in it because it's been really stressful and have been really heavy, feel free to just turn off your sound, or just kind of go outside for a couple of minutes. The video will be about 11 minutes long, so just kind of a warning for everybody that's watching. So give me 1 second.
Car. Just want to make sure I'm not handcuffed. Can't go anywhere. I'm out, man. I can't move.
That was a video that Ryan Colasso filmed recently in London while being stopped and searched in his car. What the police in this video didn't know was that when they stopped him, Ryan was actually driving home from doing an interview about police racial profiling, because he's been stopped 22 times.
At times I can be followed, and it is interesting to say it as a location scout, because that means I'm all over the UK. It's just something that's sitting in my head all the time, and again, I still find it very surreal. And it was literally like, not again. This can't keep happening to me, man.
If you're Black in the UK, you're 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than if you're white. In the US, close to 80% of people in federal prison for drug crimes are Black or Latinx. The war on drugs has fundamentally reshaped the way we live. It affects everybody's lives, but it doesn't affect everyone the same. These laws function very differently for people who look like Ryan than for people who look like me.
It's called proactive policing in the UK, and I've seen it. They look and they immediately stop you. Between those seconds of them stopping you, they're talking to each other and saying, what should we say when we see it? What should we say? What should we say? Should we about drugs? You're searching for drugs. You don't really have any reason to anyway. I've not done anything.
There's quite a smell of cannabis.
There's a large smell of cannabis. Did you just say there's a large smell of cannabis coming from my vehicle?
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with you? Is there something wrong with you? No, I've never smoked anything in my life.
What happened to Ryan is not a bug in the war on drugs. It's a feature. Racism is written into its source code. These are issues that people of color have reported on tirelessly from across the world. And what we're going to do now is show how what happened to Ryan in London in 2020 has its roots in what happened in America in the 1880s.
Treating us like animals, as they call us, thugs, as they call us.
This notion of implicit bias, seeing a young black man and just making an assumption about who he is, what he's about, how likely is he to be involved in criminal activity simply because of the way he looks.
Up through the 19th century, drugs we now consider illegal were widely used across the world, mainly for pain relief. Then came the American railroads. In the mid-1800s, hundreds of thousands of Chinese workers came to America to work on the railways. But when the tracks were complete, they were seen as a threat to white American workers. American racists found that an effective way to stir up anti-Chinese hatred was to demonize the practice of opium smoking. Lurid, race-baiting descriptions of Chinese opium dens began appearing in California newspapers. This strategy worked. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the only US law to ever successfully ban immigration solely on the basis of race.
The context of the way in which US drug policy was developed was that there was always, for each drug, a specific racialized link. So the very first anti-narcotic laws targeted opium and opium use, but it specifically targeted it the way that Chinese communities used it. So what was illegal was smoking opium. It's not using it in pills, which were the way in which white people used it.
Flash forward a couple of decades, and a new drug emerged to capture America's fevered imagination, and a fresh racial minority to use it to persecute.
You mean I've been taking dope? Cocaine. The kid catcher.
Once enslaved, its victims sink ever deeper into a quagmire of moral decay.
Haven't you any pride or decency left? You used to be sweet and clean.
The drug was cocaine, and the minority, African Americans.
That's when you started seeing stories in the paper talking about Negro cocaine fiends. And the stories were so prevalent that many local police departments throughout the South increased the caliber of the bullets that they were using because they came to believe you needed a bigger bullet to bring down a black man who was on cocaine. We know, in fact, that that's not true.
It was these campaigns and stories that in 1914 led to the passing of the Harrison Narcotics Act, the first federal attempt at drug prohibition, and the blueprint for what would eventually become the global war on drugs. In the national conversations leading up to the passing of the Harrison Act, one medical expert gave this warning. If you want to understand just how deeply the origins of the war on drugs are rooted in racist violence, that text we just saw should make it clear. But really, the drug war didn't properly get going until this guy came along. This is Harry Anslinger. In many ways, he's really the architect of the modern war on drugs. Anslinger started running the newly founded Federal Bureau of Narcotics, known as the FBN, in 1930.
The DEA has inherited the history of racism and misogyny that dominated that agency throughout the period of Anslinger, and that they see themselves as being at war, and the people that they are at war with are primarily people of color. So he was very focused on things like cannabis and heroin and drugs that could be associated with racial minorities.
Drug prohibition, driven by racial anxieties, grew and grew in importance in American law enforcement. This only became more pronounced in the 1960s, as drug use became associated with counterculture, the civil rights movement, and the opposition to the Vietnam War. It was Nixon who formally declared a war on drugs in 1971. And this is where federal spending on drug enforcement begins to really transform into the monster it is today. But even under Nixon's new war on drugs, there was still at least some emphasis on drug treatment and rehabilitation. For the origins of the militarized dystopian war on drugs we know and love in 2020, we have to wait for the 1980s and the racist hysteria that surrounded crack cocaine. Crack wasn't actually a new drug at all. It's simply cocaine that's been treated so you can smoke it instead of snort it. But the way it was treated by the authorities and the media was entirely different.
This is at the same time that Hollywood was celebrating cocaine use, where people walked around with little silver spoons around their neck and nobody thought that there was any problem with that. At the same time, The police were busy going out into Black communities and sweeping up Black people for small amounts of crack cocaine and locking them up.
Before 1986, the average federal sentence for African Americans was already 11% higher than for white criminals. After 4 years of crack hysteria, it had rocketed to 49%. This is where the war on drugs really starts to look like a war. Police began to look like soldiers, and American money started to flood into military-style drug enforcement operations around the world. It was also this era of the drug war that saw America begin its mania for mass incarceration.
The prison population of the United States was flat in most of the 20th century. The last 50 years is this era shaped by a commitment to mass incarceration and excessive punishment. Prison population goes from 300,000 to 2.3 million, and this has really redefined the kind of country we are, the kind of place we inhabit. I think the greatest tragedy of the era of mass incarceration has been its impact on people of color.
America has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. And there are very clear racial disparities in this. The Bureau of Justice estimates that if you're a white male in the US, there's a 1 in 17 chance you'll go to jail or prison at some point in your lifetime. For Hispanic males, it's 1 in 6. For African Americans, 1 in 3.
Did I win the war on drugs? No. In fact, I don't even think I made a dent in the war on drugs. We've incarcerated a whole generation of people, mostly African Americans, and we haven't solved the drug problem like we've purported to do. Yes, we put a lot of people in prison, but most of the people that we put in prison, or at least a good number of them, were put there for nonviolent drug arrests.
The system tilts in a direction that is unjust, and particularly when you think about nonviolent drug offenses. This is an area where the statistics are so skewed, you have to question whether we have become numb to the cost that it has on these communities, whether we think it's somehow normal for Black youth or Latino youth to be going through the system in this way. It's not normal.
This continues today, on the streets in 2020. When George Floyd was killed in Minnesota, this is what one police officer called out while he watched.
How long y'all gotta hold him down? Why would you do drugs, kids?
So we see over and over again that when police kill someone, particularly somebody unarmed, they look for some history of drugs or drug involvement as if somehow that justifies their action, even though at most it's only tangential. Every community at every socioeconomic level uses drugs at pretty much the same level. So the fact that these things keep happening primarily to Black and brown people has nothing to do with the drugs. It has everything to do with drug law enforcement.
In the UK, police often claim they use stop and search powers to deal with knife crime. But in London, over the first 7 months of this year, only about 20% of searches were for knives, while over 65% were carried out under the Misuse of Drugs Act. The burden of this falls massively disproportionately on people of colour. And it's not just in street-level policing. It's the entire criminal justice system. People of colour are not only more likely to be arrested, but when they are arrested, they're more likely to receive prison sentences and for a longer time.
This is really kind of a touchy subject for me. My father was in prison. He had life in the feds. Also, I'm in prison. Then on top of that, I have sons. 2 of my sons went to prison. So they followed the same footprints as I did with my father. Nobody was there for them. With that being said, we need to be there for our family. We need to be there for our sons.
I haven't hugged my son for so many years. I hunger for that day.
I think it's important for us to remember when we think about the deaths of Rodney King, Laquan McDonald, Terrence Crutcher, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, that these people were all in some way caught up in the war on drugs, and that was used to justify their premature death at the hands of law enforcement.
In a historical moment where we're radically reconsidering how racial politics has shaped the world, recognizing how the war on drugs has always been driven by racist policies, from its origin up until today, is crucial for every one of us to understand. And maybe then we might be able to imagine something better.
Any thoughts, reactions?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen kind of videos like that before, and I think at the very least through the just the narrative of social conscience over the last year. I think many people, unless you've been living under a rock, have been have been educated in one way or another about how, just in general, the criminal justice system are just the systemic barriers that are in place for racialized individuals. But and even kind of stretching it a little bit further to outside that video, when you look at things today, you're talking about a safe drug supply, and I think about what's happened recently with marijuana and how it's suddenly become legal in Canada. You think about it from an economic perspective of who's really kind of benefited from that at that point as well, when it becomes regulated, and then the access to create a business at that point, to get a loan for one thing, to start a business, to to get into a position to create a living off of something that was once illegal, to is something that's you could support your family with legally. And and there's a number of systemic barriers there as well for racialized individuals that are in the way of them now being able to care for themselves and care for loved ones with that. It's just it's just a cyclical thing that just keeps happening, and that have really odd parallels with the queer movement as well. You look at the history through the 20s and 30s in the US onwards, and the very beginnings of the war on drugs, and a lot of those propaganda campaigns are just rooted in just lies, just baseless lies. And that's happened to the queer community, that's happened to many communities. And at least I feel we're at a point now where we're just calling that out, and just really calling out the BS that's out there, and calling out anything that just doesn't make sense or just not rooted in fact.
Yeah,
so many thoughts.
Yeah, so many, but all very good, all very valid. Yeah. And it's important to just realize that these things are happening even in 2020 or 2021 rather. But I think we're trending in the right direction. We're definitely not quite there yet, but we're, with all these things going on, honestly around the world, and all these different kind of issues and topics, I think we're trending towards the right direction. So some positives.
Yeah, and that's the beauty as well of living in a world that's a lot more closer knit than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, because the intersections of all of our lived experiences are just unfolding before our very eyes. And it's becoming more clear than ever before that though the lived experiences of different demographics and groups may be different, the source of the systemic barriers, of the discrimination, of the implicit biases are often the same. It comes down to criminal justice systems. It comes down to people who are going into situations, people in power, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's public institutions, people in power who already have their implicit biases when they're creating policy just out of nowhere without really any basis in fact. So yeah, that's why it's important to read your news, educate yourselves, everyone out there, on anything that you see. That's what's really gonna drive change out there.
Just being aware, kind of advocacy work on these different issues, making sure you even yourself check yourself for different implicit biases that you may have about whether it be drugs or people. Just making sure you yourself are doing the work, making sure you check yourself, and just making sure that you're going in the right direction, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mentioned this last month myself, but certainly a couple, not too long ago myself, I didn't have all this information and knowledge around drug and substance use and what this looked like historically myself. I think I was largely in that population of folks who thought this was a criminal issue, and that was kind of the be all to end all of it. But certainly as I've read more about the issues and have become more familiar with them, not just within queer culture, but within culture in general, you just you begin to really understand the real story and just unfold the truths that have just been hidden from you. So yeah.
yeah, it's definitely hard to kind of understand all the different things that are going on in drug use, substance use, and how policies and policymakers and law enforcement have failed different communities. But just being able to educate yourself, like you have, Tristan, that making sure that you know what's going on, that these things are going on, and you can do some advocacy work if that's what you feel like it's good to do.
And that's why, our organizations together, that's why we work with, York Regional Police with our Community Consultative Roundtable. A little bit of a plug there. A lot of people may not know that, but, our organizations, along with a few others in York Region, meet quarterly with them and bring a lot of feedback to them, things like this, things that relate to the queer community and other items as well, to so they know, how to better educate themselves and how to better serve our communities. So, the work is being done out there, not just, by the two of us. We have partners in this throughout the region and at our respective agencies. And yeah. So I don't have any more questions here myself. I don't see any questions in the live stream. So we'll wrap up for the night, if that's okay with you, Alex.
Yep, I'm all good here.
Alrighty, for anyone who's still watching, next month for our coffee night, let's chat. A little bit of lighter fare. We're going to be celebrating Pride, and we've got Baby Bell Bell, a drag queen that we've partnered with before, who'll be joining us for a little bit of an interview. It's going to be lighthearted around Pride. What Pride means to them, what got them into drag, and we're going to have a couple of drag performances live streaming as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And I know CAYR Community Connections has quite a few events as well coming up to you. I know I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I know you've got a lot going on in the month as well. Do you know what you've got going on off the top of your head?
I think we got about 6 different events. I can't name all of them, but I can definitely send a poster. It kind of shows everything, time, date, everything. So if you're ever interested, just feel free to join in, pop in, say hi.
And to check out those events, I think it's www.cayrcc.org.
Yep, or you can check out our Facebook and Instagram, and you'll kind of see some poster information there too.
Awesome. And a little plug for Your Pride as well, our third kind of partner in this. They've got live streaming events throughout Pride Month on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays as well. I want to give them a little shout out, and I think that's it for the night. All righty. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here tonight, and stay well, take care, and we'll see you next month.
Take care.
All right, and that's ended.
Ooh,
oh, wow. I was not really looking at the time. Oh, my.
Always 8:03.
Well, I won't keep you too much longer, but thank you very much for that again tonight. That was really awesome.
Yeah, thank you. You were really great. It was like on the ball with everything.
Oh, but sometimes I have no idea what I'm saying or doing, and then once I get into it, I guess I'm just I turned into from Clark Kent to Clark Kenteth, I guess. I don't know.
It's great. Keep going, Superman.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm gonna log off right now myself, and we'll edit this video. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll see you around.
All right. See you around. Take care.
Bye.